to Sugar Without the Icing, which is a special presentation by Dr. Carolyn Dean, sponsored by RNAreset.com. I'm Jenny Sanders. You might recognize my voice as the co-host of Dr. Carolyn Dean's radio show on Achieve Radio every Monday evening. We're happy to have you with us today. And we're going to be talking about an exciting topic. And the irony of it is, of course, is that sugar is required for life. So how do we have the issues that we have with sugar and the opportunities that we have with sugar all in the same place? Well, Dr. Carolyn Dean is going to explain that to us today. And for those of you who are not familiar with Dr. Carolyn Dean, who is a medical doctor and a naturopath, she has a very unique history of her own that I'm going to share with you today, just to bring you up to date with who she is. And one of the things that happened with Dr. Dean is many years ago, she was experiencing magnesium deficiency symptoms, and she was asked to research a book on magnesium, did not know the significance of it, found out that magnesium deficiency was the source of her own heart palpitations, IBS, leg cramping, and these kinds of things. And it moved her into a place to become an actual unbelievable worldwide expert in magnesium and mineral deficiencies and how to resolve them through lifestyle changes, including supplementation. And as she moved through that process, she ended up actually having to develop her own highly absorbed mineral formulas because manufacturers couldn't do that. They wouldn't do it. A lot of reasons why. Don't need to worry about that today. But that's Carolyn for you. That's our very own Dr. Dean, who is just going to take it on and complete it in excellence, no matter what she sets her hands to. Well, here's another exciting thing about Dr. Dean, which a lot of you guys may not know, because, it's become very popular for people to recognize now that sugar is an addictive, poison, toxic substance that's not good for the body. But back in 1986, now 1986, everybody take a minute and think about where you were in 1986 and what you were preoccupied with. I know what I was preoccupied with in 1986. But Dr. Dean, who was already well into her medical career as a MD and a naturopath, was on television in Ontario. Chad, I think I can hear your keyboard. And she was on a TV show with Dr. William Crook, the author of The Yeast Connection. And it was an interesting sort of combination what happened there, but there was a huge snowstorm in Toronto. And you remember in the 80s, everybody was kind of fixated to their television. They didn't have on demand and stuff. And so an unreal amount of people called into the show that night. 80,000 people called into the show that night. And she became aware and educating people on sugar at that time and asking questions about it. Years later, she wrote Yeast and the Women's Health with Dr. Cook after he died, and she was also a consultant for the Yeast Connection website. In addition to that, she did a Christmas sugar show with Deanie Petty on the CBC. So here's Carolyn. She's in the throes of her career, and she's just trying to warn people about sugar back in 1990. And she got out some sugar, and I think it was a milkshake or a soda pop, and she measured out exactly how much sugar was in each of these, trying to show parents the idea about what's happening with their children when they're consuming so much sugar. And that set off a tidal wave of events that actually caused her to be admonished by the Canadian College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, by a Canadian sugar lobby group. There was a red flag that was sent on her practice. And then, they attempted, quote unquote, to take away her license, even though she didn't even have one anymore, because by that time she'd moved to New York and she was working with other doctors, but they did try to tarnish her name. And so these are kind of some of the things that have happened as Dr. Dean has courageously told her story and told her position on sugar and discouraged people for over 30 years not to consume sugar. So that is my introduction to Dr. Dean today. And now we come full circle 30 years later, ladies and gentlemen. She has stayed the course, and she's here today to talk to us about sugar without the icing. Carolyn.
Jenny, thank you so much. Seriously, you should just do the whole webinar. You're awesome. I mean, you told it better than I could, without any of the strum and emotion and all the things that I went through, which I didn't really, because look where I am now, working with awesome people like Ginny and Chad to bring you the information that you require. So I'm going to move on. We've moved through a few slides. We're now um, down to the slide about SuperSugar in the RNA reset drops. And what I'm focusing here on, just very briefly, is the supreme irony of my war against sugar is that there is a SuperSugar in the RNA reset drops. It's C122H197O98 instead of the C6H12O6 of ordinary sugars. So that's something that you'll be seeing us doing research about in the future. In the meantime, you can look at our RNA Reset Drops webinar to describe this unique product. And as I say here, since I've personally been on my own complement formulas for many years, I'm much less concerned about sugar and yeast overgrowth because my body is able to take care of these things. So I'm not quite the fanatic I was, but I still realize how important it is to talk to people about sugar, the problems with sugar, to try to get your left brain knowledge to kind of overcome your right brain emotionalism about how wonderful sugar is. There has to be a balance. And the next slide about the necessity of sugar, Ginny did mention that the sugar glucose splits into two molecules that enter the Krebs cycle to make ATP, magnesium energy. And I put the Mg in there for magnesium because 6 of the 8 steps of the Krebs cycle require magnesium. And what I've learned of late in talking and writing about the keto diet, it teaches us that we're not totally dependent on sugar because fats can also enter the Krebs cycle and give us energy. However, the sugar lobby says we are dependent on sugar, and it says all sugars are equal. So this is where we have the problem with the commercialization of sugar, the way the sugar lobby group treated me. They'll go to no ends to stop people saying, quote, bad things about sugar. The next slide is about Chinese diet theory. When I was in New York doing AIDS and chronic fatigue research, in I think 1992, 93, this was on the heels of the attacks on me, and I had already been slated to go to New York anyway. And in New York, I met up with a Chinese Taoist priest, actually. He wasn't a doctor, he was an acupuncturist. And I learned that sweet foods and sweet herbs nourish, harmonize, tonify, and strengthen the body. We have breast milk, which is sweet. Most tonics are sweet. So there's something in sweetness that people go for to nourish, harmonize, tonify, and strengthen. However, too much is too much. The sugar, wheat, and dairy that I tell people to avoid in yeast overgrowth causes dampness and mucus, which are related to mold and fungus. They can grow mold, fungus, and yeast in us, this type of dampness and mucus. Yes, in Western terms, yeast overgrowth. So sugar promotes dampness. It also thickens the blood, which is interesting. And blood clotting is now such a common condition that so many people are being told to use blood thinners. And thickening of the blood, sugar, dehydration are the two big causes. The next slide just gives the statistics on sugar consumption. We have, as you can see here, an increase of sugar consumption from 1815. We're back at the slide with the young lady slurping up her Slurpee from 1815, 15 pounds a year on up to 1999 at 150 pounds a year. Now, around that time, as you can see on the other side of the slide, we started to get into high fructose corn syrup. So they started splitting the statistics between sugar, table sugar, and high fructose corn syrup, because they tried to say that the high fructose corn syrup was natural and it was just from fruit and everything was right with the world. And then there's also the diet drinks where people are drinking 175 cans per person per year. Now, I'm not drinking any, so someone's doubling up their amount. So this is a lot of sugar, a lot of chemicals that are going into the body. And the next slide about sugar consumption talks about the soft drinks consumption increasing, the 1984 timing of Coke and Pepsi begin using high fructose corn syrup. And this was really a horrible state of affairs that completely caught everyone unawares, where the consumption in children doubled. And it became such a problem that soda companies were pricing the cost of their sugar-loaded liquids lower than water. So, I mean, that you can imagine the horror that I felt when I realized that this was happening. I'm just going to move myself. We've got our lawnmower people out there today, so I'll just hide away. The next slide, we have the real reason that I wanted to do this seminar, because you know the statistics, you know that sugar's not good for you. You've heard it over and over again, but you may not know how much you've been lied to and brainwashed. And I think it was just a few months ago, I wrote a blog called A Sugar-Free Half Century. And I began by saying, what would the world be like if we didn't become so addicted to sugar over the past half century? If allopathic medicine, which claims to be scientifically based, had listened to scientists 50 years ago about the dangers of sugar, we could be living in a totally different world. The FDA's given mandate is to ensure the safety of our nation's food supply. And if sugar is not safe, shouldn't the FDA have warned us about that scientific fact? Often, when a doctor tells patients to severely cut back on sugar, they do listen. So having doctors pass on this relevant information about the dangers of sugar could have saved millions of lives. Now, you should look up that blog. Just Google A Sugar-Free Half Century and my name, and send that out to everyone you know, because that's what happened 50 years ago. I was caught in the middle of all of it 30 years ago when the sugar lobby group in Canada was still trying to tell everyone that the only problem with sugar could be cavities, and completely covered up this evidence about the sugar actually affecting the heart. When they found out from this study 50 years ago that sugar was causing heart disease, they buried the research, they stopped funding it, they wouldn't allow that research to be published, and they pointed the finger at fat as being the problem and the cause of heart disease. And we still have the cholesterol lobbies trying to say that cholesterol is the problem, and it really isn't. And the keto diet is kind of proving that. So we've lost 50 years of health. So if that doesn't kind of incense you and make you realize that, oh my gosh, I've been lied to, and sugar has all these negative aspects that everybody in the alternative medicine world is talking about, then it should help make your decision to cut back and avoid sugar as much as possible, or as much as you should, in order to feel better. The next slide, I'm going through now some of the effects of sugar. What I learned, and I put in, I guess I put it in the Magnesium Miracle book, that one molecule of fructose uses 56 atoms of magnesium in order to metabolize it, whereas glucose only uses 28 atoms. So this is more of my fructose information that you really should know about, and you should be reading your labels when the labels are trying to tell you that there isn't any sugar. It could be a fructose sugar in there. So sugars we find from sugar cane or beets or corn. Now you have to know too that most of the corn in America is genetically engineered at this point. And sugar is devoid of fiber, vitamins, minerals, and all the synergistic nutrients that food requires in order to help digest itself. And sugar, as I say, for the metabolism, it requires the magnesium. It requires enzymes, minerals, and vitamins to process it and metabolize it in the body. So people, and then this last fact that they realized that people, the horrible slave labor used to harvest sugar cane, the slaves were actually healthier. They had healthier teeth because they just ate the straight sugar cane. They just chewed on the sugar cane itself, and the owners ate refined sugar, and they're the ones that developed obesity and diabetes. And they've known this all along. The next slide, this is how industry hides sugar. And I'm obviously not going to read through all this, but it's almost 100 names for sugar that you could find on labels to try to cover up the fact that sugar is the highest, has the highest amount in a product. They'll separate all the different sugars out and put 3 or 4 in a list instead of saying sugar is the first ingredient. The next slide, I'm sure people who are interested in sugar have seen this, that sugar is high in ketchup and salad dressings and non-dairy creamers, and the different types of sugar, dextrose, corn syrup, solids, malt powder, are all listed separately to avoid listing sugar as the main ingredient. Now, the business about chocolate bars, I was almost going to put in a few slides about chocolate because it's so high in magnesium, but usually it's mixed up with sugar, so it takes away from the fact that it's a high magnesium product, because it needs the magnesium to metabolize the sugar. The next slide is more about fructose. You can do your own research. Go to Dr. Robert Lustig's YouTube called Sugar, the Bitter Truth. At the point I made this slide, he had 8 million views. And he says that this high fructose corn syrup is a smoking gun. Fructose is metabolized in the liver in a whole different way than glucose is. It really overruns the liver, and it builds up liver glycogen and triglycerides. And presently, there's an epidemic of non-alcoholic fatty liver that the doctors just throw their hands up and say, "Oh, we don't know what's causing this," and it's caused by sugars, especially the fructose sugars. And glucose is metabolized in the mitochondria in most cells of the body, so it's spread out over the whole body in its metabolism, whereas fructose just relies on the liver. And this business about fructose being 7 times more likely to create AGEs than sucrose or table sugar. The next slide explains that this AGEs, they're advanced glycation end products. They're proteins or lipids, which is fats, that become glycated, which is bound to glucose as a result of exposure to sugars. Hemoglobin A1C, the test for diabetes, is a glycated sugar product. The AGEs, as I say here, hasten aging, heart disease, diabetes, atherosclerosis, chronic kidney disease, and Alzheimer's. The fructose as well does not suppress the hunger hormone, which is ghrelin. So you actually eat more when you're using fructose sweeteners. Fructose ingestion does not stimulate insulin, which is why they kept saying, oh, well, you know, if you're diabetic, you can eat as much fructose fruit sugar as you want because it doesn't affect your insulin. And all of a sudden, that became very problematic when people start developing fatty livers. And the other leptin business, leptins make you feel like you're full, but fructose doesn't stimulate leptins. So fructose is causing metabolic syndrome, obesity, diabetes, cholesterol, and triglyceride problems, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease. So we've got a real problem there. And it's not going away. You don't hear about fructose or high fructose corn syrup in the media as being problematic because the industry would really come down on anybody who talked about this. The next slide is something that I've been concerned about for many years for many reasons, but the young people today are focusing more on vegetarian and vegan diets, and they don't realize the problem with fruit and fructose. They attract people to these diets because they're told they can eat unlimited amount of fruit because it's, quote, natural. But the high fruit diets cause elevated triglycerides, as I said before. I noticed one online blogger bragged about her 51 bananas a day diet. And if you break that down, one 8-inch banana, 31 grams of carbs, which is 17 grams of sugar, 10 bananas, you end up eating 42 teaspoons of fructose. It's crazy. I'll get to how that overloads the body in a minute. Even the next slide where I talk about the Smoothie Revolution, you get your 40 ounces of green drink, and we still have vegans, vegetarians who approach us with their leg cramps and heart palpitations because if your food, your spinach and your greens that you're putting in your green drink is not grown in a soil that's high in magnesium, you're not going to get your magnesium or your other minerals. And what happens is, to make these drinks palatable, they tell people to add lots of fruit. Add your mango, pineapple, and bananas and blend until smooth. The next slide has a fruit smoothie recipe, and it's got 61 grams of sugar, which equals 15 teaspoons of sugar. Grams, you have to learn to divide by 4 so you get the teaspoons, because grams doesn't mean anything to most people in America. And the next slide, I talk about the vegan versus keto. where basically I think you detox with a vegan diet and you lose weight with a keto diet. You can listen to our October 2018 radio show archive on Dr. Carolyn Dean Live for a former vegan who described what she went through for decades, feeling ill on a vegan vegetarian diet and being told all the time just to be stricter to get healthy, whereas what she really needed was protein. Losing weight with keto, download my Reset Your Ideal Weight book. Treating yeast overgrowth with keto, which is a basic yeast-free diet. So for me, keto is a yeast diet and a weight loss diet. I don't think people necessarily have to do keto for life. I really do look upon it as a weight loss. So you're going to choose a balance of both extremes, eating your animal protein and your vegetables with limited fruit. That's my basic diet. And the next slide, that's just a header on the effects of sugar. The slide after that, I'm just going to highlight a few things. You can look at this webinar. I put a lot of text in my webinar so that people can go back and just sort of click through and not have to listen to all the words. But I've already said sugar is not a nutrient. It reduces your immune system to the point where you're going to get infections. It's associated with ADHD, triggers yeast overgrowth. The next slide, number 7, we're talking about arrhythmias, diabetes, asthma, migraines, bowel diseases, PMS, and depression as being caused by sugar. And you won't know it until you do the sugar experiment and stop your sugar. And the next slide, we're talking about insomnias, fatigue, panic attacks, hypertension, hypoglycemia, and osteoporosis. And tooth decay is just one of these almost 24 symptoms. Whereas what I mentioned earlier, the industry just says the only side effects of sugar are cavities. And the next slide, an old, I'd say an acquaintance. I didn't know Abram Hoffer that well. I met him several times. He's a Canadian doctor, and he worked with Linus Pauling and introduced the orthomolecular medicine approach to health. So Abram Hoffer says that refined sugar and refined foods such as polysterols, white flour, and the like are nothing less than legalized poisons. Sugar is an addiction far stronger than what we see with heroin. It's the basic addictive substance from which all other addictions flow. Now that's heavy words, but they are true. When you do studies, animals will go for the sugar more than they'll go for their food. And the next slide, I want to highlight Nancy Appleton. I quoted her many times in the sugar book that will be offered to you at the end of the webinar. I don't know if Ginny mentioned this. The reason why I was attacked back for doing the Deanie Petty show, the reason they gave is that I was trying to sell a book. And apparently Canadian doctors aren't allowed to make any money other than giving patients drugs during their appointments. But anyway, they said I was trying to sell a book. I wasn't. I was researching a sugar book. And after I was attacked, I just put the book aside. And I only just finished it this last month. And that book is going to be available at the end of the webinar. And most of my books are free anyway, but we're launching the sugar book today, and it is called Sugar Without the Icing. So in the book, I do have a list of Dr. Nancy Appleton's 146 reasons why we should avoid sugar, giving the scientific journal article reference to prove each of her points. The slide after that, that's my cavity slide. I'm just going to jump over that because it's ridiculous the way industry and even the American Dental Association says that soda is fine for kids. And the next slide after that, the sugar effects, insulin resistance, diabetes, and heart disease. And this is what I want you to really take note of. You know, earlier I was talking about sodas. Sodas have 10 teaspoons of sugar. Milkshakes have 27 teaspoons of sugar. That's what I spooned out on that TV show back in 1990. Well, there are only 1 to 2 teaspoons of sugar in our bloodstream at any one time. So 10 teaspoons in a soda acts like a sledgehammer on the pancreas. The pancreas overproduces insulin, which bombards the cells of the body with too much sugar. And then the cells kind of shut down. They don't want to take any more sugar in. So that's insulin resistance. The insulin that's high in the body, it will start producing fat. As soon as people start taking insulin, diabetics, so with type 1 diabetes, when they're on insulin, they gain weight. Insulin promotes weight gain. The next slide on sugar effects, I'm making note of this peripheral neuropathy. And I hadn't known about this until I was finishing up the sugar book, and I've read a book called Sugar Crush, How to Reduce Inflammation and Reverse Nerve Damage. This is a book you have to read. Dr. Jacoby, he's a surgical podiatrist. And before he found out about sugar, he was doing a lot of amputations. And what he realized is too much sugar in the blood that hasn't been shunted into the cells drops into pathways that convert glucose to fructose. And on the way to fructose, sorbitol is produced. Now, it's a bit complexified here, but what happens with sorbitol in the cells, it gets stuck there. It attracts water and causes the cell to swell up and the cell to die. And all this cellular swelling will put pressure on the tiny, tiny little capillaries. And that's what's causing the damage to the retina and the kidneys and the nerves by high blood sugars. So in diabetes, we know that they're always looking at your retinas, they're worried about your kidneys, they're worried about the heart, they're worried about everything. But the nerves, diabetics get peripheral neuropathy, but we really didn't know that this was being caused by this buildup of sorbitol and actual physical pressure on the nerves. The next slide is kind of funny, but sad at the same time. 2 groups of rats. One was fed sugar frosted cereal. The other group was fed the cereal box. The rats that ate cereal boxes lived longer. Yes, shocking. And the next 2 slides, the next one is about Dr. Schoenthaler. He did these incredible studies in the New York public school system in the early 1980s, and he put 1 million children on a sugar-free lunch program for a year, and their academic test scores rose dramatically and their behavior improved. Do we hear anything about that? Was that taken up and widespread? Not for a moment. The next slide, similarly with Dr. Alexander Schauss, he worked with juvenile detention homes. The incidence of violent behavior lessened dramatically. Not headline news. In fact, especially Dr. Schauss was castigated, and somehow you can read it in the sugar book, actually. Somehow they equated his work with, trying to disrupt society or something. I don't know, but it's pretty horrifying. We have all this research that shows how bad sugar is for children, and yet we keep pumping sugar into these kids. The next slide is how you personally can get involved with the sugar experiment. Run this experiment with your kids or grandkids. Avoid sugar from Sunday to Friday. Make Sunday a sugar and junk day for the kids. Having avoided sugar for a week, most kids will react violently to the overload. They'll get headachy, nausea, vomiting. And then most kids, they'll swear off sugar themselves because they don't want to feel bad like that. So, to sum up, then, I'm saying you've been sold a sack of poison, and you've accepted it, and your health is suffering. In the sugar book, I do talk about Dr. Jason Fung's work. He's the keto expert, but he's also a nephrologist, a kidney specialist who's seen one too many diabetics in kidney failure because they won't stop sugar. And that was his analysis when he said, well, you know, what can turn this around? And he went back to research from 100 years ago that said if you stop sugar, then you won't have sweet urine. You won't be flooding your body with all these sugars. So the sugar experiment is to stop sugar. For our whole community, Ginny's staff, everybody's going to not eat any sugar today. But if the sugar experiment could continue for a couple of weeks, and note how you feel today and symptoms you have, and note how well you might go through a couple of days of withdrawal, but just take more Remag and Remite and use your restructure protein powder for some stevia sweetness, and then continue on for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, and see how much better you feel. And then only introduce sugar periodically. When I was a kid, we could only have sugar once a week, but I took on a paper route so I could earn money, so I could buy sugar every day. But anyway, do the sugar experiment, see how much better you feel. And I'm going to turn things over to Ginny now. The next slide is supplements that metabolize sugar. So Ginny's the expert there. I'm going to have her take over. Thanks, Ginny.
Well, Carolyn, let me ask a couple questions that have come in.
Sure.
Because one of the really, there were two things that came up for me as I was looking at some of the comments, and one of them I had a great exchange with Jane Avis, whose green drink is celery, cucumber, and spinach, okay, which are pretty watery vegetables. And then you've got a half a cup of blueberries and strawberries mixed in. And I think that's kind of what we were talking about, is the idea that a green drink would have any fruit in it at all. Is that what we were saying?
Well, the berries part, strawberries and blueberries are very low sugar. So
Okay.
I think that would work. What I worry about, and the vegetables are great too. What I worry about is the carrot juices, for example. They're very high in sugars. I remember one mother who was trying to make her overweight 10-year-old lose some weight and put him on carrot juice every morning, and he started developing severe headaches. It was just too much sugar for him. So yeah, you just add up your grams, and if you're on a keto diet, you want to be between 20 and 50 grams, and you don't want to use sugar as a drug. This is what people are doing in the smoothie and vegan vegetarian world.
And how is that being a drug?
Well, it makes you high.
Ah, got it. Okay.
And then you crash, and then you need another high. So that's when you have your cup of coffee with a few teaspoons of sugar. So it's this roller coaster that's constantly putting more than 2 teaspoons of sugar in your body at a time, which will just cause your body to kind of freak out and create more insulin, which then allows makes your body gain more weight or add more fat. And so you just have to realize what's going on. Spread out your fruit during the day. I recommend 2 pieces of fruit a day instead of endless fruit. That's how I gained my extra 10 pounds over here in Hawaii, is eating fruit all the time because it's just so awesome.
Okay. Okay, so we still have people commenting on the chat lines that they can't hear
No.
either Carolyn or I. This has been happening through the whole webinar. So I'm just going to take a minute and type in one more time that you've got to refresh your browser if you lose your sound. Okay, so let me just type that in really quick.
Okay.
Because people are just, they can't hear me, but you can hear me, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we can hear, okay, and everybody can hear everybody. It just seems to be unique to different people's systems. Okay, now going back to the questions. Somebody typed in, Philip typed in, I was under the impression that fruits require different enzymes to digest, and to mix fruits with vegetables or protein causes havoc in the digestive tract. Is this true?
Well, that's the whole food combining topic that some people seem to react in that way, but I don't make it a rule anymore. I used to sort of think that way, but uh, I think it's when people's digestion just got off kilter anyway that it was hard for them to do combined food eating. But just do what makes you feel good. I would not make it a rule.
Okay, very good. And also, there are hidden sugars in some vegetables, as we know, Carolyn. For example, your potatoes and your corn and this kind of thing. And,
Mm-hmm.
Avocados have a little sugar in them. But we're talking about predominantly, we're talking about all the processed sugar, processed flours, all the whites. That's what they call it, the white diet: processed sugar, processed flours, and things that can be deceptive. And the main thing, the benchmark that you're giving is, between 30 and 50 grams of sugar a day if you're on a keto diet, or just for everybody?
On a keto diet, but if you pay attention to how you feel and you're going up to the 250 grams of carbs that most people eat, then it's got to be somewhere in between those two kind of extremes. But pay attention. You'll be amazed at how many carbs are hiding in your packaged foods.
Yes, I think one of the funny things that happened for Carolyn and I 2017 was when we started doing the keto dieting, realizing how many hidden sugars, because carbohydrates are sugars too, right, Carolyn?
Right, they're complex sugars in that they'll break down to glucose, but um, the vegetables carbohydrates have a lot of fiber. So fiber carbs are not sugar carbs. So when you look at labels, it'll say carbohydrates, 30 grams. And then below that, it'll say fiber, 10 grams. So, and then below that, it'll give the sugar in grams. And so the keto people look at the non-fiber carbs, whereas the yeast people look more at the sugar carbs.
Okay, very good. Excellent. And then did we talk about fatty liver disease?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Okay.
talked about that being high in fructose drinkers.
Um,
Uh, yep.
but what about how to reverse that? I think that's the keto diet, right?
Oh, yeah, it's just stopping sugars.
Yeah.
You just stop it. Just stop, 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 stop.
Stop it. That's cute. Okay. Well, let's talk for a minute about supplements that metabolize sugar. And the most awesome thing in the whole wide world, of course, is that one of the biggest supplements that helps to metabolize sugar, and probably judging from our comments on our chat line here, we have so many of our wonderful, wonderful customers that we love just as much as we love life with us today, is the Remag, our magnesium and Remag.
Yeah, and that's the next slide. Tell Chad.
Chad, the next
slide.
slide. Okay. So the magnesium in Remag is outstanding. As we know, the magnesium that's lost through stress, excessive sugar, alcohol intake, diabetes, chronic diarrhea, thyroid disease, all replenished through Remag. The other thing is that Remag has an extraordinary relationship with insulin and insulin metabolism. And that's really, really important to take away sugar cravings because of the way insulin works in the body and the pancreas to provoke your idea that you need more sugar. But if you have proper magnesium levels in your body, then you're not going to have that. It's like what do they call it? A drip that you have, like a pain drip you have in the hospital. Well, the insulin kind of does that in your body. It's like morphine drip, like hit the buzzer and get some more. But if you've got your insulin balanced more properly with magnesium, you're going to have a much better experience than that. Also, of course, your Remag maintains a healthy heart. We know that. So important. And then the other thing is it's going to treat that muscle and nerve pain, some of which, again, we talked about today, is provoked by the neuropathy that comes from the sugar crush, the excessive exposure to sugar. You can also get magnesium through your foods, whole grains, legumes, brains, almonds, broccoli, and chocolate. But let me just say this. One of the things that we found out when we went to the National Institute of Health this year is that one of the biggest sources of magnesium for people has been wheat, but people don't eat wheat anymore because of the glyphosates and because of all the GMOs and all the problems with digesting the glyphosates and the GMOs that are in wheat. So you really want to pay attention to that. The next slide that is really good for you that help metabolize sugar is Realign. And I just say that Realign is the biggest hug for the liver ever. It absolutely helps digest carbohydrates and protein. And as a matter of fact, the elevated homocysteine level is a result of low B vitamins in the body. You've got total support for detoxification in the liver in Realign. You've got the B complex that's essential for cell division, and you've got necessary Bs for the RBC, the red blood production, red blood cells. Now, also, you can get your Bs through your green leafy vegetables, your liver, your kidney, and your brewer's yeast, but I personally love Realign. I just think it's the most wonderful thing ever. Another great supplement that metabolizes sugar in our next slide is our Remite. And Remite is our multi-mineral formula. The chromium in Remite is the key to regulating blood sugar, and high fructose corn syrup depletes chromium. It's just a vicious circle, people. Thank goodness we have all this stuff to help us out. Selenium regulates blood sugar by promoting glutathione, and also Realign helps promote glutathione. And the zinc in Remite is great for blood sugars and also vital for the immune system healing and detoxification, which we know there is toxicity in consuming sugar. The next product that we have that helps to metabolize sugar is, next slide. So we've got Remag for the magnesium, heart, stress, nerves, muscle loss through sugar intake. We've got glutathione in Realign. We've got the B complex in Realign that detoxifies, metabolizes carbs, proteins, and fats. We've got vitamin A in the Blue Ice Royal. We've got vitamin C in the Whole C Reset, which we don't have yet, but what's coming, hang in there. We've got chromium that does blood sugar balance in the Remite. We've got zinc with the Remite, and we've got selenium with the Remite. Now, I'm going to go off topic just one second off screen and tell you this. Another fantastic product for blood sugar sugar metabolism is the RNA drops. And Carolyn can't talk about it as easily as I can because she's a doctor, scientifically based, and these kinds of things. And we know the science behind the drops because of the radish experiment we did, which we featured on YouTube. But I just want to tell this story real quick. A couple years ago, of course, I'm working with Carolyn. She tells me I should watch Sugar, the Bitter Truth, which Dr. Robert Lustig, we heard earlier today. And so I watch it. It's on YouTube. At that time, it only had like 4 million views. Okay. In the video, he describes how fructose in particular cooks your bones. And when you think about it, if you take a piece of toast and you put it in your toaster and it takes the toast from white to brown, that browning of the bread is the sugars caramelizing. Well, high fructose corn syrup caramelizes your bones. Okay, well, that just freaked me out. So about a week later, I get a call from a customer. She's 52 years old. She had to have a hip intervention with the orthopedic surgeon. They thought she might have a problem. They went in to look at it. And he said she had the bones of a 20-year-old. Her bones were so white, bright white. I mean, just bright white. He was shocked. And he said, what do you attribute to that? And she said, well, I don't know. The only thing she uses is the RNA drops. At that time, that was the only product that she had been using. So I say this, we have a SuperSugar in the RNA drops, RNA reset drops. It's fantastic. I'm not going to cut everybody's body open and prove your legs are wider, your bones are wider. I'm just saying, consider the possibility. All right. Because it's pretty good stuff. Okay, so now let's see. We're moving on. Oh, here's another thing. One thing we want you to know about too is what are some sweet alternatives, okay? And sweet alternatives in the next slide, Chad, is what Carolyn has provided here for you guys to know about. Is one great thing is stevia. It helps regulate the pancreas. It is safe in diabetes, hypoglycemia, and even candida. And we know we've got a lot of people on yeast overgrowth. It's 200 times sweeter than sugar, so you do not need a lot. And it actually makes up 41% of the sweetener market in Japan. It was banned by the FDA in 1991 as an unsafe food additive, and then Canada approved it as a dietary supplement, and then the FDA reinstalled it as a dietary supplement. So it's not approved as a food additive, so it can't be used in food products, but it can be used in dietary supplements. And Restructure, which has stevia in it, is a dietary supplement because it has other supplemental dietary components to it. So that's just wonderful. I know people ask a lot of questions like, what about monk fruit mixed with erythritol? We don't have as much support on that particular product. It hasn't been as clinically studied as stevia is. So we're not going to come out of the gate and recommend that as hard as we can. Stevia is very, very safe. It's just safe. Also, our very good friend Joan Anderson up in Barrie, Ontario, Canada, said on the chat line, Carolyn, that the RNA drops have been whitening her teeth. And see, this is what I was talking about. So thank you, Joan, for sharing that with us. Yep. Thank you, Joan. That's very sweet of you to share.